So I was looking at your IMDb and I didn't realize,
IMDb.
yes, and your Wikipedia, and
Goodness.
I didn't realize because you're Sam who does the awesome paintings, and I'm Andy who's unaware in depth of things that happen outside of his little sphere of influence and
Mm,
interest mainly. As I thought, wow, Sam's art is amazing, and I love David's books, so that's where I normally see the art,
hmm
with those books and some other things. I thought the IMDb, this can take me ages to get through. It's just chock full of like a who's who of all of these achievements. I thought, wow, this is amazing. But I noticed something that interested me. First of all, you grew up in Liverpool. Is that right? Or you were born there and
Well,
grew up in that area?
that's right. I was born in Everton, Liverpool, um,
Okay.
but I grew up in Runcorn, Cheshire,
I know where that
still in
is.
the northwest, pretty
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
near Merseyside.
Okay. This is two pints of lager country, right?
I guess. As a kid, I wouldn't know, but
It's a famous series. It's like a BBC Three series.
oh
So
right, okay,
you
yeah,
know the
yeah.
one.
2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps.
That's the
Is that
one.
isn't that Wales? Is that Welsh?
No, it's Runcorn.
Is it really?
Yeah,
I didn't know
yeah, that's
that.
right.
That's bizarre.
Look, I mean, I'm not familiar with the area anyway, but there were two things that really struck me about it. I grew up in Wales, in
Hmm.
Cardiff, and Cardiff's quite different to the rest of Wales in many ways. There's a lot of different sort of cultural and regional variations there. It's something I'm always interested in, and maybe when you're living in the US as you are, Americans why don't get this? Why would they get it? But there's a different perspective almost for people who live in different regions, different parts of Britain.
Hmm.
And I was just wondering how your growing up in that area in Runcorn in Cheshire formed your perspective on your view of life compared to, say, Andy, who grew up in Wales, or Edward, who grew up in Winchester, etc.
That's a really interesting question.
Mm.
But you're right. It is, as varied as accents are throughout the United Kingdom. And for people who have never been to the UK, they think that we're a small collection of islands, but we're really quite big. We're much
Mm.
bigger and more varied than people realize, as you know, of course. Um, and I think the variations of interest also are in these little pockets of, as trends are today, you have these groups of people who are
Mm.
into different things in different regions. And so you only need to sort of take a trip to Devon to suddenly discover a whole different group of people into other strange things that you might not normally have been interested in to begin with. You may be interested in ghosts, and then
Mm.
you take a trip to, the Cotswolds, and all of a sudden you're interested in fairies. And
Mm.
yet they're all intertwined and all very much related, as we know. But for me, I mean, I grew up, as I say, in Runcorn, Cheshire, until the age of 10, and it was on the edge of a forest. And so there were canals and, fields and very much surrounded by wildlife of all kinds of, lovely British nature, very simple country life, sort of a vibe of, what's the word? All creatures great and small,
Mm.
very pleasant, green England. But I'd also spend a lot of time in natural history museums in Liverpool, particularly Lime Street, and a couple of trips to London, of course. The Natural History Museum there is unbeatable.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to a few around the world, and there's nothing comes close to the
Mm.
London one. Um, Manchester's pretty good though. But I would say, as far as interests go, I think it really depends on, from our generation anyway.
Mm.
Not entirely sure your exact age, but I would guess we're
We're
around about the same.
I'm
Um,
76. I'm just slightly
oh,
ahead. Yeah.
I'm 84. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so no, I was born in 78, but I'm
Yeah.
84 years old. I'm actually 45. Anyway, numbers are not my strong point. I was going to say, it depends on the bookshops and sort
Yeah.
of thrift stores that you have access to as a kid
Mm.
of our generation. There was no internet. There was
Mm.
no real sort of expanse that we have now where you could look up anything. If you've heard of a strange animal in the Congo, you can look up all kinds of articles.
Mm.
Whereas in the 80s and even the 90s, it was really hard to find anything, any book, unless you went to a huge national library. You're not going to find it. And the internet was very, very basic in its early days of the late 90s.
Yeah.
It was nothing. Today, again, you can look up anything. So I think for me and anyone, depending on where they are, it really does depend on, whether you were lucky enough to travel to a gallery or a museum or a bookshop, an old bookshop, and they may or may not have something on the shelf by Lauren Coleman or someone, you just didn't know. I did happen to find, I think it was a Reader's Digest may have released it, a series of magazines that came out in the 1970s that spanned for, I don't know how long, but it was up to sort of, I think, 15, maybe 18 volumes of these. You could collect them into like hardbacks. Anyway, this whole thing was sort of, someone had collected this, and it was in a bookshop, and it was The Unexplained. And on the cover, they had sort of jigsaw pieces embossed into this hardback, and The Unexplained was written in gold, and it's all very, very nice. But it was this magazine that someone had collected in the 70s, a series that covered everything from ghosts to cryptozoology, UFOs, parapsychology, everything. And my mum bought it for me. And it was in the basement of this bookshop, and I just found this sort of 12-volume. I've since found a couple of the others, but it was like someone had collected up to 12 of these huge books, big, thick stacks. And I just had to have them, and I said, Mom, you're not going to believe what I found. Look at this. And before we knew it was mine. So I think my childhood, sort of growing up with my head buried in a lot of that, really paved the way for my interests into the unexplained and just the vast array of strangeness that's out there on the fringes of just everyday life. If you just look a little closer, it's all there, isn't it?
No, it is. I think it really is. And I think everybody has those starter magazines. Again, in our age group, it's very important that those books that you had. I think it was something when I was perhaps 8 or 9. It was either called Scream magazine or something similar to that, and it had little sort of cartoons of like horror, ghost stories, a bit of Nessie, a bit of Bigfoot, and then obviously the few In Search Of reruns and Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, which was always amazing to drag you in and to get you interested in that. Yeah, but I mean, apart from that, all we had was clippings from newspapers or little stories that might be in local press before chat rooms, and perhaps as teenagers, then, things like Fangoria magazine came along for the horror fans, and, you could check in to see what these great effects guys were doing. And that was a heavy influence as well. But still, I think, you're right. It was hard to get the influence that people just have at the touch of a button today. So perhaps that sparsity leads to more creation, more of a creative spirit. And talking about that, actually, I also noticed that you went to University of Leeds.
I did.
So was that's at Wakefield? So I was there in 1996. I had a girlfriend who was staying in, I think, Bretton Hall, and she was part of the art university there. So we used to go to the sculpture park
all
the time, which you're probably very familiar with.
That's cool. Yeah, I've never been.
Really?
Yeah,
I thought you must have been. It was
no. I was in the city of Leeds. Right.
Okay, so there was the Wakefield was the one that was kind of out on the outskirts. But I really loved it. I loved the city. There was this great sort of pub, the Cock of the North or something. There was a great rock club in the centre.
Sounds good.
You don't know it.
I was familiar with Bradford Rio's.
Okay.
I went across there for a few shows, but yeah.
Okay. There you go. All of my signposts, small world, but all the wrong signposts actually. Well, I think but going to that sculpture park, I was going to say it must have had a great influence on you, but it clearly didn't.
No.
But it's an awesome university to have those facilities close by. And knowing some of the artists that I knew that came out of it at the time, that was really, really fantastic. I think there's another aspect of that though, and what people I met there or artists were also really into music. But since I suppose, been sort of like kind of the closet as a cryptozoologist in 2016, I turned my hobby into a semi-career of some kind. I noticed at the conferences that there was a more of a triangle actually between artists, musicians, and cryptozoology. And this seems to be something that features in a lot of people. At least people have at least two of them in their repertoire. And at the conferences I've been to, people seem to have all three. What do you think that is? Well, what joins those three things together? So I was at the Crypticon after party, I think, in before 2020, and they had a karaoke, and I was a singer for many, many, many years. And to my surprise, half of the speakers got up and really killed it on the karaoke. They were all ex-musicians. I thought, what the hell is this? What is that link, do you think?
I think it's just they're all cut from a different cloth, really. It's or the same cloth. Different from, I would say, regular people, but I heard a term, the last couple of years, NPC, non-player characters, that sort of are within a game,
I understand what that is now. So
and so
you've solved it for me. Yeah.
If you imagine like a world where you're the only thing that's important, and let's face it, we're all number one. But it's all our own experience, isn't it?
Yes.
Everybody else are either just non-player characters or they're other people in the game that you can interact with. And I think those are the only ones that stand out and listen to sort of actual music rather than simple beats for simple people.
Yeah.
It's a different cloth. And I think everybody who's into monsters and more bohemian lifestyle art and music and everything else, it's all the same world. And everybody outside of that who are sort of into numbers and money and cars and stuff and skyscrapers, it's just kind of a dull existence to me anyway. It's I'm sure there are people out there that live and breathe it and love it, jump out of bed every day to make money, but it's not it's not what I'm from. I'm definitely aware that there are more people into rock music and cryptozoology, as you say, than there are people into cryptozoology who also do accounting. Like, it just doesn't seem to fit together.
Yeah. I haven't met many cryptozoology researchers who are also accountants, perhaps fans, but yeah, not the accountant cryptozoologist on the weekend. That's not a common one.
And I think also, I don't know what it was like for you as a kid, but I've mentioned this in the past before. For me anyway, I think there are two types of boys, maybe girls too, on occasion, who either play with dinosaurs and dragons and monsters, or they play with cars and spaceships and robots. And it's one of the two. It's very rare you'll find someone who's into both, unless they're a spoiled child. Maybe someone who has their fingers in all different kinds of creative pies would probably be that person who had access to everything as a kid. But I think for me anyway, I grew up in as I said before, the natural history kind of aspect of life, where things were dinosaurs and real monsters came from that upbringing of, what's strange, how far can you go with that? And I think music's the same. The stranger the music, it just opens your brain, doesn't it?
There's creativity in it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't need any drugs for that. It's that's something I always sort of say, each to their own. But I've never needed to expand my brain. I think a book is enough.
I agree wholeheartedly. Now, as a touring musician in the past, and somebody also doesn't drink, never mind everything else. People are always very confused by that, and I used to think, well, I'm here to play the gig. That's sort of the drug I'm looking for tonight. Is the show? Yeah, that's the.
It's a funny one, isn't it?
That's the reward, not like getting messed up before you get on stage or after you get off stage. And there are downsides to that. You're always the designated driver for a start. You're the only person lucid enough, hopefully, to get everybody home. But that's part of it. I think there are genres. There's cultures that often and ways of life that attach to certain interests. And if you're not into them, sometimes you can feel like a bit of an outsider, even within the thing you love to do or that you profess, to be your one and only path in life, I think. Now, talking about your art portfolio again, it really was, it was a huge read, and there were so many bands on there, so many musicians, guitars, and things designed that people I've loved for years and years. Do you get to meet those people, or is it just that somebody sees you online and the commission comes in via email or phone, and then you get to work?
It's a mixture of both. I mean, living in Los Angeles now, it's I've been in and out of the area for must be nearly 15 years now.
Wow.
But before that, it would be via email. It would sort of be, either a band or a merchandise company would say, "Hey, we need some designs doing. Love your work. Would you be interested in doing this?" But it very quickly sort of put me in a position where I was able to travel and visit America and meet these people and go to those studios and see what they're working on in terms of the album and hearing the music before I even create the artwork. And that happens quite a lot. Being out here now, I just worked on the new Filter album. Richard Patrick, formerly of Nine Inch Nails, he's incredible band. Filter has a new record coming out, and of course, I'm good friends with Richard for a couple of years now. And so he just called me up one day, and that's another example of how it happens. Someone might just phone you and say, "Hey, we need some artwork. Are you on board?" But in the past, I've also just reached out myself and said, I really like your music. I'd love to be a part of that history that you're creating and be a part of that legacy. And I'd like to offer my skills and marry the two in a sense. And quite often they'll say, "Oh, wow, thanks. We like your work too." And sometimes it surprises me that they've even heard of what I've done. But as the years have gone by, the portfolio's expanded and everybody knows everybody in the industry, it seems. And so I've sort of landed myself a sort of strange position where now, if I were to look back at my teenage self at university, with a picture of Rob Zombie on my bedroom wall, from a Kerrang magazine or whatever, where he had the big claws costume thing. I had that on the side, inspiration. And then years down the line to meet him a few times and to do artwork that's ended up in his albums or T-shirts and tour posters kind of thing it's weird. You have to pinch yourself, because if I were to go back in time and say, "Hey, you'd be doing this in 20 years, 25 years," I might not believe it straight away, but I could dream that, I'll look forward to that, because it is always, I wouldn't be surprised, but I'd be incredibly excited that it did happen if I were to go back and say, "Yeah, you actually did it."
And I guess,
it's
so
weird.
there must have been points along the journey where things didn't seem so certain. You had to go through some elements of prospecting, of struggle to get where you finally arrived at.
Yeah. I think, there are highs and lows in any career. There's ups and downs, but I think a lot of it is the main enemy for me out of anything ever has always been time and finance. Sometimes clients, and it's not as though I charge the earth. I don't. I've done a lot of work for free, purely for the love of it. But there's been times where clients have commissioned me for a colossal amount of work, and they just haven't had the finance.
Wow.
Through no fault of their own. It's just they're either with a studio or a publishing company or a record label that just does not have the finance.
Yeah, I understand that.
And they just, there's no way for them to fuel such a ambitious project, even though I'm fully on board. And it's happened, I think, twice in my career where they've said, we want to do this and it'll take this many years. And I'd say, "Hey, I'd love to do it, but, I need to pay bills and eat." And if the money's not there, then logistically speaking, I could want it until the sun burns out to do it and be happy to do it. But sometimes logistically, I think that's really the only downfalls that I've ever come across, is just the lack of, I hate to say it, in some instances, common sense coming from big companies that just don't seem to understand that, people do need to sleep and eat and pay their bills.
Do you find then that even when it's a large corporate, I find this a lot when I was pitching my show recently with the large TV studios. I mean, some of the offers I got were less than it would cost to make it, and pay the insurance, and the indemnity on the program. And I think I was quite astounded by the types of offers that producers and filmmakers get just in this genre. And then this studio, this network has got your show for 4 or 5 years, or it's exclusive. And the argument is always exposure, isn't it? You'll get the exposure.
Yeah.
And if you've been a musician as long as I was a musician, you know what exposure means. It always means work for free, essentially. With the promise of hopeful increase of your standing and your stature, which normally doesn't come through. Let's face it. That's the bottom end of that. How do you get around that? And how do you, as British people as well, it's very difficult for us, maybe not for you, but generally it's difficult for us to talk about money, isn't it? To put that into the conversation when we're doing work for people. How do you do that? Is it a lot easier in LA because it's always on the line, or do you just try to, slip it in nice and casually and make sure it's understood from the start?
Well, two things. Firstly, just to your previous point there, I think there's, and I only really honestly sort of realized this and had this sort of epiphany myself in the last couple of years, but there seems to be a stigma, which is almost a myth, that to do something for exposure is a bad thing and that you'll never get paid for it and everything else. I think what people need to look at when that's offered them is to really put it on its head from the other perspective, from the other angle, and understand and appreciate that it's not the client that's going to give you the exposure. You are. And it's down to you to say, I did this, and to push this. And in many ways, you're going to have to push the band and do the advertising for them. So you're doing double the work. And not, you might do the album cover or the book cover for an author, perhaps, and they're going to want you to share it. Well, of course, you're going to want to do that because it's your bloody work. And let's say, for example, you don't get paid, but it's agreed that you don't. Then it's up to you to sort of make the most of it. What can you do with it? You're not going to do that if it's a small client, because that's not going to work in your favor. If it's a large client that says, hey, I'll, just do it for the exposure. On the one hand, you could think, well, hang on, you're a big company or a big client. You must have tons of money. Well, that's where the exposure is valuable, and you do it because you can't buy that kind of advertising. And it's as simple as that. That's your fee, doing it for free to get that amount of advertising. And so people need to look at that sort of very, very carefully before they agree to anything. And the other thing I was going to say is, I have a manager. So when it comes to finance and contracts and trademarks and copyright and anything to do with money and the changing of hands, my wonderful manager will always handle that for me. And not always. There'll be things where I'll just handle it myself, where I'm quite confident to say, oh, I know this person. Like Richard, for example, I have a rapport with him and we have our arrangements. And, there's several other clients that will come back to me over the years and say, hey, can you do this? Or I'd like to work with you again. It's been a while. Let's do something new. But if there's a new client, if it's a big client, if it's a publishing client, that's global, my manager will handle that. But it's also important to sort of understand, even with the big and small fries, that if you create a piece of artwork, it's or writing or music, whatever you do, it's your work until it's signed over in a contract to somebody else. Even if they pay you and they use it and they say, hey, we'd like to, have this song featured on our, film, or this, you've written this article for this magazine, or you've done this cover for this album, or this documentary or this post or whatever, or this t-shirt design, if they've paid you and you say, oh great, yeah, you can use it, that's great. That's the sort of gray area where a lot of people get lost and confused. And it's a tricky situation when you have a client that will hire you for something and then you'll see it used indefinitely forever. Now you can let that go and say, hey, that's fine. Or you can really get down to the grits of it and have a contract and have them buy it out. And you let it go and do whatever you want with it. There's so many different things. And there's no one rule. You have to sort of really gauge and agree with who you're working with. How big are they? How important is it to you that you work with them? Do you even like their work? You know, are they going to work for you? So there's a whole myriad of different situations, but contracts are a big one, you know, got to be careful with that.
Well, that's very interesting. Of course, having a manager really helps in that circumstance. Architects design houses, but builders build them, and you have to have the right man for each function, right?
Yeah,
so that makes sense to me. Now that was very interesting. I had a great artist, Brett Manning, do some art work for my book. I
love Brett.
Brett's great. I mean, so creative, so nice, so genuine.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Just wonderful. And I gave her descriptions of the creatures, eyewitness descriptions. She drew based on the descriptions. I said, this is fantastic. I said, I want to use it for t-shirts. I want to use it for the book and merchandise. Is that okay with you? That's fine. Every time I posted artwork by Brett Manning, even though I paid, because that's my understanding of the deal. That's her artwork
very important
that I paid for these particular uses.
Yeah. That's one bugbear, actually. I'm glad you bring that up. That's something that, and I love Brett's work. I love what she did with your books and everything. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
But that's definitely one thing that's a real bugbear for me and a lot of artists is not getting the credit, regardless of whether they were paid for the work or not. And artwork is never fully owned by anyone else, regardless of what they pay or use it for, unless there's a signed off contract. And even then they should be credited, because you might see a painting by Frank Frazetta, you know, the great Frank Frazetta, and it's on a book somewhere, but it's still going to say painting by, regardless of, you know, who may have even outright bought the ownership of the work. It's still going to have his name. And a lot of clients today, we're living in such a fast world where everything's immediate. People are using god-awful AI because they've no
going to ask you about that.
effort to have any decency to hire an artist. And so everything's so immediate, they forget to credit people. And it takes a second, you know?
They do. I mean, it's happened once or twice in the past, of course, when I've gone back and checked myself. But when you find a good artist that understands what you're trying to achieve and really puts, as you do, that extra bit of character and effort into the creative process, I think it's important. Now, talking about AI, actually, so there was two questions I had about that. The first one is about technique you use. So when I spoke to Brett, she agreed to work from the eyewitness descriptions for cryptozoological art. And I said, you can use some creative license, but if you could make it as much like the creature as is described by the witness, that would be great. Is that the same for you? Is it, what kind of split is that between creative license, you know, Mister Sam Shearon's personal style and the eyewitness description? How do you work on your cryptozoological creations?
It's funny. It's you know, people have said, you know, I like your style. I recognize your work straight away. And for a good while, I couldn't see that as the person doing it. I couldn't see that there was any consistent, cohesive style that was regular or repeatable. But people have said that they see that. But I think it's more, what I do is, it's more of the execution. And people might say that's the same thing. But there's no telltale sort of twist or embellishment or exaggerations of a particular thing. You know, there was I forget the guy's name, a famous wood carver, sculptor. He would always carve a little mouse in the corner of a table leg or a church pew so that you knew it was his. It was like his signature. He would add that little piece. I don't actually have anything like that in terms of making something my own. So I'll never put a spin on a report or from cryptozoology, any kind of cryptozoological description, I do try and keep it as base to natural history. If anything, I would maybe look at it as though, how would this appear if it did live and breathe? What would the biological parameters be in terms of how it should look if it were alive? I think that's maybe the only thing that I would put on it. But I would never twist or add something or throw something in that isn't there. I think it's important to be true. There's a lot of people who, particularly in the AI community, who will throw in all kinds of nonsense to create these Bigfoot images to promote their channels or their Patreons or whatever, which I also find pretty disingenuous when you're asking people to support you, but you're not supporting artists. I find that really ironic.
And just in the last 3 weeks,
it's an oxymoron, isn't it?
It's killed me in the last 3-4 weeks, just seeing every single podcast, every single, especially these sort of terror in the woods type posts that people are doing on YouTube, and the thumbnail always has some person, and they're sort of scarred and broken up, and behind them is the terror. And it's already a format, and because algorithmically people stick to formats because they get attention, the originality is drained out of the process already. And I've already seen some abysmal AI art, and so far, I think even when it's very, very photographic, in essence, you can tell. It's the same when CGI
straight away.
You can still tell it's not. Yes, soulless. It doesn't have depth. And there's something that's not real about it.
Yeah, it looks to me as though it's either how you would look at sort of a video game graphics and know straight away that it was a video game and not real life. Even whether it was some kind of RPG or some wrestling game where the characters are supposed to be realistic, and if you look at the early PlayStation games, everything was very blocky still. But you could still even tell now that it's a video game. And I think with AI, it has that same sort of essence. You look at it and you just think, well, there's that AI video game thing. And I wouldn't even call it art. I'd say AI imagery. And it's really disheartening. What annoys me is people sort of stepping forward with all of a sudden sort of several hundred images that they upload onto their Instagram, and all of a sudden they're an overnight artist, and they get really defensive about it, and they say, "Oh, yes, I am an artist," and you just think, "Oh my goodness,
I wanted to have your opinion on that."
Yeah, it's just have you actually ever had a paper cut? I mean, I'm not even being facetious. I mean, have you blood, sweat, and have you actually cried because of hours of work where your hand is crippled? Don't call yourself an artist if you use AI.
Tendinitis from sharpening all your pencils. I
mean, here's on my desk, an eraser and a sharpener, and a broken ruler. That's everyone needs a broken ruler. But AI. People would say, well. And friends of mine have said, who are fellow artists, have said, you've got to move with the times. This is just evolution. They said the same when Photoshop came along and you used Photoshop, for your work. And I would argue it's not the same. It's not the same.
Something different about this. It's
there's an electric pencil sharpener, and then there's a pencil sharpener. And I think the electric pencil sharpener is, of course, AI. The fancy pencil sharpener that might be a little bit, more stylized is your Photoshop. You're still doing the work. You could
There's another difference as well, though, Sam, is that it's electric sharpener. Pencil sharpener is not going to put artists out of work. It's just going to sharpen their pencils quicker.
Yes, yeah.
And that's the major difference. This essentially eradicates the need for humans. And that's a strange place to be in, because what's the point of providing a service for humans if there are no humans to take up the service?
I mean, it's this is why we fight wars, isn't it, for art and music? But when you remove the soul and the heart and the originality and the mistakes in a piece of artwork, that's a genuine intentional mistake, a mark making piece. That's your craft. That's your soul. That's a unique piece. even if it's a digital painting where you are moving the pixels yourself to get that particular little, everything that goes into a piece. You know, you if you're typing in words and hitting a button, you're not doing anything. That's not art. It's just not.
No, it's
You know,
it's not. But it's you know, it's a feeder though, and I think this exists in every genre to a certain point. There was an argument about DJing for a while. You know, was okay if you have turntables and you're mixing and you're creating new tunes as you're going along, that's art, that's DJing. But if you're just setting up the playlist on the computer and dancing, that's not DJing. And you know, things move on. We understand this, but it's perhaps a poor analogy. But it's I don't think we'll really recognize exactly what the damage is until it's done, essentially. And all of the benefits, all of the people have got now from just getting a nice picture that you can use online or in your book at zero cost. That'll be clear in 3 to 5 years' time when we're tired of it, and there is nobody to do that drawing for you anymore.
Yeah, I think you know, people would say, people use the argument, well, nobody's getting hurt by it. Just stop complaining, you know. But people are getting hurt by it. There are book covers and album covers out there that are now AI produced, and I hate to say it, but they're utter shit because to the untrained eye, and everyone has their own view and their own journey, and you know, there's someone out there who's never seen a Dali, and when they see a Salvador Dali, their mind will change, and they'll be like, oh, now they're exposed to surrealism, and they might look up something else. And so you're going to have those people that will see a piece of AI imagery and think it's incredible because they've never seen something like that before. But if they were to be told how it was done by scraping other people's work and mashing it together, it's stolen work, stolen graft. You know, some would argue, well, you're a fan of Salvador Dali, so haven't you stolen from him in a sense of the ideas of surrealism? And you could argue a point that an artist his mind will expand based on everything he sees. Yeah, but he's still doing the work. A machine is not. And so I suppose it comes down to the argument, well, what is the artist? Is it the mind or is it the work? It's a real tricky one, and I don't think the language has really been explored to kind of investigate and show people what an artist is. And I think it takes an artist to see it. For you know, a non-artist isn't going to understand unless, as I say, they've had a paper cut and they've really cried over a piece of artwork that's maybe not been published in the correct color or something. You know, things that will break your heart because you spent weeks on a piece that is printed wrong or is stolen, or you know, someone claims it's theirs and there's some kind of nonsense and confusion because who did which version of which first, and all of that heartache that comes with art isn't found in AI. It just doesn't exist. It's soulless. You're stealing and you're profiting from other people's hard work. And I think Molly Crabapple is an amazing artist, and she's really at the forefront of arguing the point against AI to say that in the industry, it's overshadowing and destroying people's lives. And it's not a case of, you know, a printing machine has suddenly taken people's jobs. It's worse than that. It's far worse than that. It's stripping the creative soul from people. So,
and producing, well, I agree with you. I'm producing work that's based upon a popular algorithm as well. So essentially nothing new can be produced because it has to fit. It has to get likes and, you know, follows and shares, and that's not going to produce anything risque, anything different on you.
All looks the same. Yeah,
it's the same with music. I mean, I think we are, you know, a year or two away from, you know, AI produced songs, even with the voices and the instruments and everything there, like complete fabrications with CGI characters and
just it was a mix-up last week.
I
think it was. I may have seen it on Twitter. I hate Twitter, but I caught a story on Twitter. I think it was the artist Drake. A song had been released with his voice, and it was streaming all over the place. And then his label had to pull it all down really quickly, even though like thousands and thousands of dollars had been made from this popular track that wasn't even him.
Wow. So
They'd
we're
sort of
already
taken
there.
his voice and they'd
Yeah.
modulated it and changed it. So it's already happening, which is crazy, really, when you think
It's
about it.
crazy that it's gone that far, that we have that kind of technology, and yet we're still so stupid. Stop treating people like idols, and you'll stop being disappointed. You know, basically, they're all humans, as you've discovered on your journey through, well, working with some of your heroes, as you mentioned, and that's the thing that always happens. Finally, you meet these people, and they're just people, like you're a person, a normal human being that's doing a job that somebody had to do that they were good at, and was up and coming aspiring artists. They'll meet Sam Shearon and say, "Oh gosh, like I'm working with Sam Shearon," and that'll happen. And it's a funny thing, and it was strange. He was so human because he's a human. So
yeah. I'm a big dorky nerd. At the end of the day, I like my dinosaurs, and
I love dinosaurs.
I like my toys. So yeah, I'm definitely I would say a regular guy.
Yeah, seem pretty regular to me. Sam, there was just one thing I wanted to ask you before you go, and again, jury's out. I'll review it. I'll review our possibly soon to be censored conversation at the end and see
cut it out if you feel it's easier. It's fine by me.
I don't mind at all.
But if you want to talk about something else, we can add some more time.
I think we should get onto a few other bits. One of the things actually I'm really interested in is the theories on the taxonomic identity of Bigfoot and other cryptids like Nessie and all the main types like monsters, sea serpents, hairy humanoids, etc. Do you have any opinions on that? Do you have any ideas? There's this whole religious aspect sometimes to the philosophies of cryptozoology. There's the woo believers, paranormalists, and then flesh and blood researchers as well. Do you fall on any side of that particularly?
I do. I think it comes in waves of popularity when someone has a new idea that suddenly goes viral because it's been said in a different way, much like the explosive phenomenon of the dog man. A number of years, I mean, you could even say 10 years ago, it didn't exist in a sense. It did. It was around. But over the last, maybe 3 or 4 years, it has just become this ridiculous phenomenon where it's everywhere and everybody's seeing it. And that's just one example of a sort of a viral term that spreads throughout the cryptozoology community. But in terms of Bigfoot and the paranormal or the woo or the spooky side of things that can't be explained versus natural variations of undiscovered great apes, you have those two kind of the weird and the sensible in a sense. I think what happens for the most part is there are so many different variations on the phenomena. From the description of let's use Bigfoot as an example of the Bigfoot itself. There's so many different variations. You have your sort of general consistent sort of, it's very tall, it's very bulky, it's hairy, it's man-ape-ish. But then there's all these different kind of variations. Some say it has a human face. Some say it looks just like a gorilla, but walking upright like a man. Some say it was aggressive. Some say it was gentle. There's so many variations. And then you have the few, but it's like the dog man. The more people talk about it, the more people either make up stuff because they want to be a part of it and they're influenced by it and they enjoy the mythology and want to be a part of it, or they've genuinely seen something and they're starting to come forward because other people are coming forward and they think it's okay now to talk about it, even though it really was weird. And those are the ones with the flowing balls of light, or Bigfoot seen with a UFO, or strange lights in the forest kind of aspect, or a hunter will shoot one and it will disappear in a flash of light. All of those strange Bigfoot stories, the very paranormal accounts, are the ones that people will say, well, there's more to Bigfoot, and I put this in a sort of a level of, well, it's just an excuse. People get lazy, and they kind of throw away any reasoning to really explore an answer, by saying, well, Bigfoot can't just be a normal creature then because of all of this. There has to be something more to it. And that will explain why we never find a body, or we never know where they are, or sometimes the footprints will just end and there's nothing there. And I think when people suddenly just say, well, it's just weird, they throw it all out. And I think there's a huge, for me anyway, a huge chunk missing that hasn't been explored and researched. When people just go, oh, well, then it's just paranormal. Well, then you're just putting that thing on it. Like, to say a ghost is, it's either an intelligent spirit that's trapped on this earthly plane, or it's a recording trapped in the fibers of a building, perhaps. People will put it in these categories, but I think everything to do with the supernatural or the paranormal, two very different things, is you've either got an undiscovered or rediscovered species, or something that should have died out a long time ago is still found alive, or was classified extinct, is now walking around in the outback maybe, or you've got a completely brand new species, which we find every day, insects, birds, reptiles. They found another species of bird last week maybe, that has poisonous feathers. So, I mean, that's just, I mean, you could say, well, that's paranormal, it's super nature. This bird has developed a way that if a cat were to jump on it, the cat's poisoned before the cat even eats it. It's soaking up toxins from its feathers into the paws of the cat, and the cat will have a reaction. So this bird has evolved and developed this unique way of defending itself. And when you have monkeys out in the Far East that don't have a nose, where you may have seen them, it's just a hole with a slit down the middle, where it looks like a skull face. They've evolved so differently because of their climate, because of the areas where they live and the weather, and all of the food they eat, their social behaviors, all the different colors that they display on their fur. Every animal out there that has a little bit of a strange uniqueness once was a cryptid that someone had seen and described, and they would say, oh, that's just so weird, it couldn't possibly exist. The giraffe is a perfect example. The giraffe is a 20-foot tall monster. It has spots like a leopard. It looks like a camel. It has two horns on its head, but on the ends of the horns are these solid balls. It has long legs, but its neck's a really long neck, but it doesn't have a long tail. And it eats grass, and it has cloven hooves. Well, that sounds ridiculous, but that is a giraffe. But when they brought that description back, they called it a camelopard, a camel leopard, because they didn't know what else to call it. And now we know it's a giraffe. And so I wonder with Bigfoot, these descriptions of, well, I saw this giant ape man with a ball of light, people aren't looking into it enough and really kind of missing opportunities to perhaps find a new type of glowworm. Maybe it's mashed them all together around a rock. Who knows? Maybe that's the way they, mate, by showing like the nice glowing ball. Look at my glowing balls. Who knows? But I think people throw too much out with paranormal and just say, well, it's paranormal, and that's the end of it. They don't.
Sorry, it was the glowing balls. They got me. It was...
Yeah. I mean, we all have glowing balls once in a while.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I had sort of like a little spider web framework of fireflies being strung together and floated through the air as a mating ritual, Sasquatch mating ritual. But it is amazing. I think that's the point. I made this point ages ago, and I said, when the first people that dove beneath the ocean and literally watched an octopus not only take on the color of a rock, but the shape of it. They would have witnessed a mystical and magical power. With our ancient understanding.
Even now, it's mind-blowing. Yeah,
it is.
Even now.
But biologically, we know how it works. Whereas then, the octopus could have been a venerated mystical animal with magical powers that you didn't dare, to trespass upon. So I think that's the way I always think about it. perhaps they do have some abilities, infrasound and other things that people speak about. Cloaking, that's it's a bit of a far out one, but who knows? Who knows how these things work?
Cloaking is one that I've heard a few times from people, where if you take the polar bear, for example, is on first value looking at it, it's white. But if you see them in the zoo, some of them are greenish brown underneath, because the hair follicles are hollow, and so they'll have algae growing inside the hairs. And the only reason they really appear white, even though their skin is black, is the light is bouncing inside the crystals of the hair. Well, who's to say if a porcupine can flex its quills out to appear different in pattern and shape, then, and that being a mammal, could an ape develop hair that could do the same and disguise itself as a tree, maybe instantly disappear, or something else? Who knows? But I think, as you're saying there about animals changing shape, just think of butterflies that they completely disappear as a leaf until they open their wings again. And then some of them look like an owl. And this is one that always, I've had so many discussions with people about this, where an insect, particularly it's usually an insect, that will mimic another animal. You may have seen the caterpillar that hangs from a branch, and its head kind of puffs out and it looks like a snake, and it even has eyes on the side of it. And it moves like a snake, but it's a caterpillar. And I've always argued, how does it know what it's doing, and that's a choice. That's not evolution.
How does it know what a snake looks like?
Yeah, and I just think, I just don't, I can't get my head around it. And people say, well, that's evolution. Evolution just takes so many eons.
How does evolution
survival of the fittest? And I just don't buy it. There's something else going on. At one point,
there was one eye of the snake, and then we need two, and the next, it doesn't make sense. I think, it doesn't make sense, because even with survival of the fittest, if that type of evolution anyway, I think evolution takes place in some respects, but it has to have still some intelligent force behind it in some way. In some way, there must be, and that sounds very religious, and maybe I am, but I've tried that way. It doesn't make sense. It basically, I think it requires as much faith to believe such things happen that way as it does to believe there's some divine force directing it. I think it's almost on a par at some point.
It's supernature for sure.
It's supernature. There's let's say there's this big gap where we don't understand beneath both schools of thought. Both could be called faith if you wanted to. One believes that the big man in the sky did it, and the other believes that the divine force of nature enable that caterpillar to mimic that snake over millions of years. And it's still a stretch. It's still a stretch.
It's always a stretch.
I think we should finish on tips and techniques for other artists, people coming up who want to put themselves out there, who want to make their art individualistic. What would you share with them, whether it's advice on how to proceed or tips and techniques to make their art unique? What would you say?
I think there's a few things that, if you're wanting to become a successful artist in terms of having that as your sole job, as your career, I think it's really important to remember a couple of things. Really, is if you're looking for clients and work, and you want to be hired by someone you admire, or work with a company that you admire, whether it's a band or an author or a sporting goods company or a trucking company or whatever it may be, always remember that if you don't ask, the answer's always no. That's it. You have to ask, and don't be afraid of asking what their budget is. If they're coming to you, you always must ask what their schedule is and their deadline, and make it very, very clear when that is and whether you're able to do it. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't undersell yourself. Don't overcharge. And above everything else, always listen to everybody else's piece of information that they can give you as advice or criticism. It's really important that you listen to criticism. Don't shut it off. Listen to it. Look at it from their angle and think, why are they saying that? And you'll grow and develop and become better and better and better. You become a perfectly adaptable organism by doing that. So just as a takeaway, if you don't ask, the answer's always no.
Yeah.
That's it.
I would agree with that. And I would say, Sam, yes, also in my own experience, I've been surprised at how many times I've just got what I wanted because I asked for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It
And
really
somebody
is.
said, "Oh, you want that? Okay, who are you?" Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We'll give it a go. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
That's as simple as it is. You know,
Yeah.
you can just say, "Hey, I really like Slayer. I'd love to work with them," and then you do. And that's just how it happens.
The dream, living the dream. I mean, as a former metalhead, as a complete rock fan, as I was for many years, now listening to ancient Greek sonnets in the afternoons.
Why not?
It's still rock of a kind. Yeah, megalithic. That's the style. Yeah, I think that, you know, that's great advice, and you're living that life. You're doing it, you know, better or worse, and it's just been a pleasure finding out all about how you got there. Sam, thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy.